Hi, I'm Samantha,
Hi, I'm Nadia.
and welcome to Concordia Church Online.
You know, I discovered that I kind of like cooking. Now, I like eating more, but I found that cooking actually can be enjoyable. But my cooking has definitely had an evolution. It used to be that I didn't cook, I grilled. And my preparation was pretty much defrost a piece of meat, turn on the grill a piece of meat, eat that piece of meat, along with a potato and some vegetable. And that was pretty much it. Simple, tasty, worked for me. But you know, as we got older and started trying to eat healthier and have less meat, especially less red meat, my cooking had to kind of change. I didn't want to sacrifice on taste, but we did want to eat a little healthier, and that meant my cooking involved a lot more preparation, right? And that took a lot more time and effort and energy than just see meat, grill meat, eat meat. Now, what I've got to do is got to search for some of these healthy recipes. I mean, shout out to my son for giving me a Mediterranean cookbook that's been really helpful. But I still have to search through that for the recipes that I want. And then I've got to now buy all sorts of ingredients that I didn't have to before, because most of those recipes require some sort of special ingredients, and then I have to prep the ingredients. I mean, my new cooking style involves a whole lot of chopping and chopping and chopping, and also things like tenderizing and marinating, and again, they all take time. And then I've got to add all the stuff in the right order, at the right temperature, at just the right time, and then I got to make it look good on the plate. I guess they call that presentation. Now, there's a lot that goes into making a tasty meal and making it turn out just right. And if I were cooking for you, you'd just come and you wouldn't know about everything that went on behind the scenes to prepare that meal. You'd just eat it and say, oh, that's good, and be done in 5-10 minutes with something that took me an hour or 2 hours to prepare. And I think that's kind of what David's getting into here at this part of Psalm 23 that we're looking at. He's looking at God's behind-the-scenes preparation so that we can have a better life. Right? Here's what's behind that. God knows what we need. And God sees what's ahead, and God anticipates the dangers and difficulties we're going to face. I mean, do you think that the COVID year just snuck up on God, that he didn't see that it was coming? Do you think that your stuff that you're going through right now snuck up on God? I mean, sometimes it seems like that to us, but the fact is, God sees everything that's happening and everything that will be happening, and behind the scenes, through all that going on, God is working for our good so that we can survive the difficulties and the dangers. And so that we can grow even though those difficulties and dangers are out there. And that's so even we can find places that we can actually thrive even while there are still difficulties and dangers around us. Now, David described that this way. Psalm 23, verse 5. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Now, at first, I was kind of confused by that whole table language here. I mean, I'm thinking, is David switching metaphors or something? Because sheep don't sit at a table. They graze as they go along. So I'm thinking maybe David is switching metaphors and talking about some sort of heavenly banquet that God is preparing for us, and where we can't be harmed by anything at all. And I think that's there in the text. But I also think that David isn't just future-oriented here. I think that David actually wants us to see how God provides in the here and now, in a very practical way, and how he's always working behind the scenes to do that. And so I did a little more digging, a little more reading, and what I found is that David might have been thinking of what are called the tablelands when he wrote, "You prepare a table before me." I mean, the phrase in the verse before that, the valley of the shadow of death, we talked about that last week, how that was like the way from the ranch to the high country where they do the summer grazing. Well, once you get through that and you're in the high country in sheeplands, whether it's like in Palestine in ancient Israel, like David was, or Africa, or the western U.S., like Montana or Colorado, where their sheeplands are, when you get up there to that high country, there's not just peaks up there, there's also some flat spots. They call them mesas or tablelands because they're flat like a tabletop. And those are the best places for grazing during the summer, and that's where the shepherd's going to be leading them. But in order for the sheep to actually do well there, the shepherd didn't just show up with the sheep in the summer. The shepherd actually went ahead and prepared things ahead of time before the sheep ever got there so they could do well once they got there. And I think that's what David has in mind in this part of the psalm. I mean, the preparation for the shepherd was actually rather involved. The first part of the preparation was in the early springtime. And the shepherd would go up to those highlands, to those mesas, to those tablelands, and he'd scout them out. And he'd do a preliminary survey, and he'd look and see where the best pastures were likely to be, and he'd kind of map that out in a way that was going to be most beneficial for the sheep. And then a couple weeks before they were actually going to head up that way, the shepherd would actually take a few more trips up there, and he'd prepare things ahead of time for the sheep to get there. He'd do things like distribute salt and minerals in strategic spots, kind of like little rest stops or rest stations for the sheep. The shepherd would then he'd look around and see what actually came up, and he would kind of remap his grazing plan to say, oh, here's where the strongest pasture is that we can graze in longer. Here's the stuff we kind of want to avoid, and adjust his original plan. He'd also check for poison weeds that had come up, and either work really hard to pull them out. That was the best thing he could do, or if he couldn't get them out, then he would mark them on his map so he could lead the sheep around those poison weeds. And then there's the water sources. He also had to prepare good water sources and make sure they were ready to go. And so he'd be cleaning debris like sticks and leaves and dirt that got into the water sources. He'd be cleaning those out. And he would be rebuilding the little earthen dams that would hold some of the water. And he would be pulling out some grass and other things that had overgrown little springs that would come up to prepare that good source of water. That's work. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of hard work. And it's a lot of hard work that the sheep never saw. Right? The sheep, all they saw when they got there to those tablelands, to those mesas, all they saw was a feast. They saw these good lands prepared for them. All they saw was this land is good. All they saw was the results of the shepherd's efforts, which the shepherd willingly put in, even though he wasn't going to get any credit for it. And that's because, it's because the shepherd cares for the sheep. The shepherd cares for the sheep, and because the shepherd always has the sheep's best interests at heart, and because he wants the sheep not only to survive, but to thrive, even if they don't recognize all the work that he put in to make that possible. And I think that's what David wants us to see here. That God is like that shepherd. All right? Do we always recognize all the work and the effort that God's put in behind the scenes? No. I mean, we're people of the now, aren't we? And when we get through those dark valleys to good places, we just start eating, and we don't take very much time to think about how we got there, or to thank God that we got there, or to think what God was doing behind the scenes, both to get us to that good pasture and then what he was doing to prepare it so that it was good when we got there. I mean, maybe Paul's thinking about that a little bit when he wrote this in Romans chapter 8. In everything, God is working toward the good of those who love him. In everything, God is working. Meaning that Paul's thinking about that God's always working to prepare the table, to give us good, to lead us to good, to guide us through bad to something that's better. But again, we're people of the now. And because we're people of now, often when we get to the good, we don't take a lot of time to acknowledge that, or even to thank God for that. And even amazing things that God's done become kind of like, oh yeah, ho-hum. I mean, take forgiveness. Now, there was actually a lot of work that went into forgiveness. God had to plan things so that everything fell together just right. Jesus had to come from heaven to earth and spend 30-some years here. Jesus had to be rejected and ridiculed and abandoned. Jesus had to die a cruel and painful death on the cross. Jesus had to come back from the dead and alive again so that he could defeat sin and death and the power of the devil. And that's the work that went into forgiveness behind the scenes. And you know what? I don't think we think about that whole lot. I know I've heard that so much and preached it, talked about it so much that I don't pause to think about it all that much or to thank God for it, for the work that he's putting in there to give me that amazing thing of forgiveness. Now God's so good that even though I don't always thank him for it, the forgiveness is always there for me. Always there when I need it, even when I don't take time to acknowledge all the work that God put into it. But I want you to think about this. If you put that kind of work and effort into something like God did there, I mean, don't you want other people to notice you and to appreciate the work that you put in and to thank you for it? I mean, I do. And I think maybe God wants us to notice and thank him and appreciate all that he's done too. Again, he's so good that he's not going to pull that away when we don't. But because I think God wants to hear that, let's take a moment right now to just pause and reflect on this. I want you to think about, as you think about your life right now, or in this past year, what do you see that God's been doing behind the scenes to prepare a good place for you? And then after you think about that, or if you're watching or listening with someone, I would encourage you to take a little more time and actually talk about that. After you do that, then take a few minutes to actually acknowledge God and to thank him for that. Do that now. The next phrase Davis wants us to focus on is this: you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. I mean, sometimes when we get to that good place, we think we've kind of arrived, right? And we begin to coast, to take it easy. Maybe you even have the view, like a lot of people do, that the Christian life should be, for those who are really good, should be easy and carefree and no troubles, no problems at all. But even though the sheep have made it through the deep, dark valley, it doesn't mean they don't have any troubles. It doesn't mean there aren't any dangers. Even with all the shepherd's advanced preparation and care and work, the tablelands of the high meadows, they're still not without dangers and difficulties. And as much as the shepherd's working for the sheep, there's also things up there that are working against the sheep, even there in the lush tablelands. right? There's poison weeds that, remember the shepherd worked to pull them out? Well, guess what? They grow back. And those poison weeds, if the shepherd doesn't lead the sheep around them or pull them out again, the sheep are going to eat them and they're going to get sick. Some might even die. There's also storms that can come up quickly and make the high country a dangerous place. And sheep can suffer and even die from exposure just like people can. And maybe you're thinking, well, it's summertime. What happens in the highlands in the summertime? Well, I remember a hiking trip to the backcountry around Tahoe that my daughter and I were taking one year. And as we're hiking back in, going farther and farther, and this is late June, all of a sudden I see some dark clouds way back on the horizon. I'm like, oh, this doesn't look good. And as it's getting colder and colder and the wind's whipping up, and then the snow started falling. And we kept pressing on because we wanted to get to that one spot, but it started falling harder and deeper, and we weren't prepared. Ended up using an extra pair of socks that I always bring along as mittens. But we ended up turning around and hiking down so we could actually make our way out again. And by the time we got down from the mountain, I mean, we were really cold. And we had to warm up really fast or it would have been a dangerous thing for us. So there's those storms as well. And then the biggest danger, it's predators. See, there's crafty predators that are up there, wild animals that hide above the mesas, above the tablelands, up there in what you call the rim rock. They're kind of having a low profile, and they're peering over and they're looking down at the sheep, and they're looking for an opportunity. They're looking for when they can sneak up on the sheep and do a sneak attack and get them when they're unawares. Now, what's the sheep's best defense in that? Well, number one, it's don't get complacent. But number two, and most important, it's stay close to the shepherd, right? Because the shepherd's strong, and the shepherd is vigilant. The shepherd is always watching over his flock. The shepherd knows that those dangers are out there, and he knows that those predators are out there, and he's looking for them, and he's searching for them, and he's watching out for them, also that the sheep can enjoy what he's already prepared for them. So they can enjoy this banquet of the tablelands even while the danger's still out there. And I think that David wants us to understand that God's like that shepherd too. All right? That what does it say about God? That he can actually lay out a banquet. Lay out a banquet while our enemies are watching on, but he's so strong and so vigilant that we can just rest and eat safely and securely. And to me, it says we have an awesome God, one who richly and daily provides. See, Jesus knows the devil's prowling around like a roaring lion, seeking to devour us, even when we're in a good place. And Jesus also knows every sneaky trick that Satan's ever tried to pull on us, because he's seen them up close. He's experienced them himself, and he knows the way out. Now here's a little Bible on that. Hebrews chapter 4. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all of the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. Take a moment to read that passage again for yourself and talk about this. What special insight do those verses give you that Jesus is preparing a table for you in the presence of your enemies? The third phrase, you anoint my head with oil. Well, another reality in the tablelands in the summer is with the summer heat come summer pests. Summer pests like flies and gnats and bugs, and there's a particularly pesky one to sheep called the nosefly. Now, I'm not going to get into all the disgusting details on that, but what the nosefly does is it gets up the nose of the sheep and goes farther back, and the sheep get painful inflammations and infections, and it is so painful that the sheep are known to, when it gets in there, they're going to bang their heads against things just to try to get those flies out, and it doesn't do any good. The only thing that it does is the sheep hurts itself. Sometimes sheep have even been known to accidentally kill themselves by banging their heads trying to get those nose flies out. Now the sheep also know what the nose fly looks like. Now remember, I told you sheep are silly, smelly, and stupid, but they do remember some things. And one of the things they remember is, here's what this nose fly looks like. And so when they see it starting to hover over the flock, you know what else sheep have been known to do? They've been known to race from pasture to pasture to pasture, trying to outrun that nosefly, trying to get away from it. Let me ask you, have you ever been able to outrun a fly? Have you ever been able to escape the flies buzzing around you? Didn't think so. And the sheep can't either. But there is a solution. The shepherd, again, is prepared. The shepherd is prepared for those pests and those problems, and at the first sign of those flies around the flock, what the shepherd's going to do is he's going to take out his oil. He's going to rub his oil on the head and especially around the nose of the sheep. And what the oil did is it kept those pesky flies from getting up the sheep's nose. And then the pesky flies, they just kind of went away. And once again, the sheep could lie down and eat in peace and in safety and rest in those lush tablelands and enjoy the good that had been prepared for them. Thing about the oil, though, it's not a one-time application. It's not like a one-shot vaccine with no booster needed. You had to reapply. Kind of like, it was more like sunscreen. Where with sunscreen, what you have to do is, you have to reapply often. If you don't, and you're fair-skinned like me, you're going to hurt. Sunburn is no fun. If you tan easily, you're going to hurt down the road when the results of the overexposure to sun catch up with you. I mean, what you've got to do here is the sheep needed the same thing, this constant reapplication. It wasn't like a 24-hour bug spray that kept them away forever. They needed to keep coming back to the shepherd and have it constantly reapplied, because if they didn't, then the flies came back and caused the same problem, which is why when the pests were causing problems, the sheep had to keep coming back to the shepherd again to get more oil. So what does David want us to think about here? Well, I think what he wants us to think about is how Jesus, like that oil, can actually heal the sores that have come from the pests and the irritations in life. I think he wants us to think about how Jesus can keep the pests from taking root in our lives and making it a much bigger issue. And I think he also probably wants us to think about how we need to keep coming back to Jesus more often for more oil. So here's what I want you to do right now. Take a moment to pause and reflect on this. And if you're with somebody, talk about it together. Which of those three do you need most right now? Do you need healing from the sores of the irritations of life? And do you need preventing those pests from taking root? Or do you most need right now a reapplication of oil? And when you identify that, what do you do to get it? So what can we learn from our walk in the tablelands today? Bottom line, Jesus prepares. And because Jesus prepares, we prosper. Now, we don't always see that. That's because we're self-centered, me-focused sheep who much of the time see only what's right in front of our noses and sometimes not even that. But behind the scenes, where we don't see, God is working. All right, God is always working, constantly working, and He's working for our good. Even though the dangers and difficulties of life are still out there, and aren't completely removed, God's still working so we can still prosper in the pasture lands and even find time for a restful banquet once in a while. It's because Jesus prepares and He anticipates our needs. Here's why He's able to do that. Because Jesus knows the territory and He understands the situation. He's been there before. And so He anticipates and He prepares accordingly. Second thing we see is that Jesus wants the best for us. He always does. And so He prepares the ground for us. He prepares rest stops that we need. He removes some of the dangers. He guides us around some of the other dangers. He guards and protects us against those that are still there, either that are popping back up like a persistent weed or like those wild animals peering over the rim rock seeking to hurt us, and He defends us when they do attack. All right. Third thing is Jesus also knows that sometimes life is going to get to us. And sometimes those irritations are going to create some pesky sores that need to be healed, or some pests that we just need to be kept away. And so he prepares enough ointment for those pesky spots of life. And He carries enough along so we can reapply as needed. Now the devil's cunning, right? He doesn't take a day off. These tablelands, these good pastures, they're not in a bubble. They're prepared in the presence of our enemies, remember? And they still see us. They're still looking on. They're still looking to steal, kill, and destroy. And being sheep, we don't really have a defense against that. But as long as we're close to the shepherd, we can eat in peace. And we can rest unafraid, even though our enemies are looking on, simply because we're close to the shepherd. And the shepherd, who is always working for our good, is enough. Right? Now that doesn't mean there are no issues on the mountaintop. Too many people, again, seem to get the idea that the Christian life should be a pain-free garden of delight all the time. It's not. All right? At least not till heaven. But Jesus' preparation behind the scenes has made it clear that the tablelands are a good place for us to be. That they're the best place to be. That He loves us so much that He's been working so hard to prepare everything for our good. And even in the midst of dangers and difficulties, to enable us to have some delightful days. Maybe even a lot of them. So here's what I've learned to do so that I can enjoy the walk in the tablelands a little more. First, I've learned to not just to trust the shepherd, but to trust the shepherd's preparation and understand that behind the scenes, He's always been working for my good. Second thing I've learned is to stay close to the shepherd, because I know even when things are good, that the enemies are still around there and they're still watching. And so I stay close to the shepherd because I know that's where my protection is. And the third thing I've learned is to enjoy what's there. Enjoy what's there because I understand that the shepherd has prepared what's good and that it is good. And you know, when I do those three things, I learn to be content. I learn to be content and I discover what the shepherd has known all along, that my cup is overflowing.